Now, let me ask you this. How many times have you heard the phrase identity politics recently? I reckon it'd be quite a few. And in the wake of the protests following the murder of George Floyd, one campaign group decided that some of the narrative promoted was divisive and actually driving people apart. Don't Divide Us was therefore born, and today marks the group's one-year anniversary. Now, I'm delighted that one of the co-coordinators of Don't Divide Us, a teacher, academic and writer, Alka, this is an interesting, Alka Sehgal Cuthbert.
Excellent.
Did I do well there?
You did.
And also Claire Fox is here as well. Alka, tell me, let me start with you. Tell me about Don't Divide Us for people that are not familiar with it, and what drove you to set it up?
Okay, well, first of all, I've got to confess, I didn't really kind of intentionally set it up. But what happened was, in the wake of the BLM marches last year, there was like a bit of a panic amongst all sorts of institutions, schools included, schools especially. And we were getting, it's like we were hearing stories about everybody wanting to prove themselves to be actively anti-racist.
Yeah.
Which was a bit worrying because it involved a whole set of assumptions that nobody had really scrutinised and weren't being discussed properly. There was a letter, I think, put out, which I think Claire was involved with, that was published in The Spectator that I signed along with about...
Many people signed that, didn't they?
Lots of people signed it. But I just really, at that point, I thought it's a good letter, I support it and I'll sign it, and didn't think any more of it.
Yeah.
But then what happened in the weeks after was really quite incredible. There was an email address put on, and we had there were so many emails coming in from parents, teachers, surgeons, people working in finance, in the private sector.
It's a full broad spectrum.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And they were all, their main worry, it's not so much that they were sort of all rabidly involved in the culture wars or identity politics, but they were really worried that the places that they worked at, or the schools that their kids were going to, or the schools that they were working at, were adopting these policies that were kind of forcing a narrative on them without any debate and not allowing any dissenting views. Because if you did, it was like you felt this sort of weight of disapproval, sort of a social stigmatisation that you might be a racist.
Yeah.
And that's really unhealthy. So from that, we just sort of had a Zoom meeting. And again, I thought, nice to meet some people on Zoom, and didn't know what would happen. But that just kind of continued and got a momentum of its own, and people started wanting to... It's almost like meeting like people with some shared values, although we came from a big spectrum professionally and politically. But we were committed to kind of a liberal idea of tolerance. And
so what are you trying to achieve?
We're trying to really, I suppose, is hold a space that is not taken over by politics, right? Politics is really important, but also there are spheres of life, including especially schools and academia, where, not just, but in your workplace as well, where you have to have different sorts of relationships, and they need to be spontaneous and they need to be freely conducted, and not sort of where people are acting in fear of saying the wrong thing all the time.
But I think the thing that's really important about this was that we were told in the wake of, as a society, it started in America, but it was very quickly adopted here. Remember, we were all in lockdown at this point, that basically the terrible murder of George Floyd, which we all witnessed because of social media, which rightly raised all of the questions about racism in society and whether there's systematic police violence. Very important questions. You can have that conversation. But we were quickly told that there was only one answer to that. And we were told that that answer was that white people, through their skin colour, were leading to the killing of black people and the demeaning of black people, and that white people, because of their skin colour, had to kind of go into some kind of apology and abasement. And for people from ethnic minorities, many of the people who signed the Don't Divide Us thing said, God, I can't bear this. I don't want people to judge me on my skin colour. I don't want people to think that I have a particular set of political views because of my ethnicity. And I don't want people to think that because I'm black, I'm going to have a particular political outlook. And I don't want white people to be walking around on eggshells thinking that I think they're a racist because they happen to be white, which is an accident of birth. And this whole thing, the point about Don't Divide Us, I think that's really been successful, and Alka and her colleagues, to their credit, have really made this come alive, is that people, you know, I was contacted by somebody who's worked in the fire service, who said that he was told that he had to go on compulsory unconscious bias training because all fire service personnel undoubtedly were racist and they needed to find out how not to be. And he wrote a letter back saying, well, I disagree with that, and he was disciplined. This started to happen in financial services in universities, and then we found out, and Channel 4 did a good, I'm not giving them a plug here, Channel 4 did a big service because they showed a very disturbing film about the implications of critical race theory in schools. They were praising it, and it showed segregated kids. Black kids were sent into one classroom, white kids were sent into another. They'd all been getting on fine, and then they all started walking around going, and you actually launched on the back of that.
It is, that's right, because, I mean, well, I'm a teacher as well, right, and this particularly angered me because it is like a deliberate attack on what they, you know, what people who adhere to this view of racism, which actually I don't really think it is even about racism, but they really hold that the default position of everybody is that you're either racist or you're a victim. So their main category of understanding people is race, is, you know, not human, not that we all have something called being human in common, but what we have is that I can't really have anything fundamentally in common with you two because you're white. So your whole experience is unknowable to me. Even though we've got language, we've got art, we've got knowledge, we've got all kinds of ways of communicating, that counts for very little compared to the feeling of being either powerful through some weird privilege or oppressed, which I find really patronising. Because it's like I've worked hard to get to do what I've achieved, and I hate to think that is done. You know, done.
One of the things I was interested in, and I don't know, tell me, Don't Divide Us views on this, is that to me it very quickly became not enough to not be a racist. You had to not only not be a racist, which, by the way, you shouldn't be a racist anyway, and that should be condoned and dealt with, but that wasn't enough. Then it very quickly became, now you've got to take the knee, and if you don't take the knee, then you're in trouble. Now, once you've taken the knee, now you've got to go onto your Instagram and make your square black, and if you don't make it black, then you're definitely a racist. And it's trying to keep up with all this thing and getting dictated to that if you don't do this, then you are the problem. And how does Don't Divide Us tackle those things briefly?
Well, you're right, there's a real performativity to it. What we do, we're a voluntary association where people meet and we support each other, we help each other, we discuss the arguments, we look at the particular cases where people are working, we help write letters. We've written a lot of kind of, if you like, collective open letters questioning all sorts of things that we think feed into this narrative. We've done some reports really critiquing the kind of that in academia, the Universities UK report, for example, which is based on the EHRC report. They all kind of build up on top of each other, based on very shoddy methodology, but more importantly, based on this assumption that you know, the default position is that you are racist unless you can actively show that you're not racist.
I need to be brief, Claire.
Alka, just one thing to say is, just in terms of what you've just said, mandated speech where you're told you have to be this kind of anti-racist. What I think is brilliant about what Don't Divide Us do is they say, if you want to fight racism, if you want to be somebody who believes in equality, it's not just one way of doing it, and we refuse to be told how to do it. And we believe that this is racialising and dividing us, and don't let them do that to us.
Interesting. Well, let me know what you think.